My brother and I, from the time we were born, hated each other, scorned each other, could not get along. We were so different, you know. I was the outdoorsman type, man of the country. I like to hunt. My brother, on the other hand, he was like a mama's boy. He liked to stay home and cook. Nothing wrong with cooking, but, you know, that wasn't for me. I was hairy. I was red. I had so much hair on my arms and leg, they said it was like a garment. I was ruddy, probably from too much time out in the sun. My brother was clean shaven, definitely not ruddy. Definitely not ruddy. You know, because I was that outdoorsman type, I liked to hunt for game. And he used to stay inside with his mom and cook. We didn't spend that much time together, Brother Lundy. We lived like separate lives. And you know, maybe that was part of the problem. We didn't spend too much time together. And then, you know, our parents didn't make it any better. Mommy, of course, loved my brother way more than she loved me. And my father absolutely loved me. I'll never forget that day when I came home hungry, famished. All I wanted was a little bit of lentil soup. And my mean brother manipulated me. He said, I'll give you my soup if you give me my birthright. What a mean manipulator. Because you know, he could have just given me the soup. Why did he have to try and take my birthright? Surely God would have wanted him to just give me the soup because I was hungry. And I know I was really hungry. I told him I was about to die. Maybe I exaggerated, but I was really hungry. And I am mad because he manipulated that situation to his advantage and took my birthright. And if that wasn't enough, he was very, very deceitful. You know, his mom, my mom, plotted against me and my dad. You know what they did? They dressed my brother up in hairy goat skin and went to my dad, who was nearly blind, and pretended like he was me. What a scoundrel! How mean-spirited to swing my dad like that. And not only to take my birthright, but my blessing. Good morning, family. Thought I'd do a little dramatization to get us started. You know, the story of Esau and Jacob, but you all figured that out, I'm sure, right? Is an interesting story in the Bible. It paints the picture of a very dysfunctional family. Would you not agree? It was a dysfunctional family from the start. I mean, they had parents who had favorites. There was deception and lying going on, encouraged by the mother. One brother got cheated out of his birthright and his blessing by the other because of all of this. And then the fact that the mother would lie and concoct this plot so that the one son could get what the other didn't was just very, very troubling for my end of thinking of things. And all of this dysfunction leads to decades of hatred and unresolved conflict. What's fascinating is when we look at this dysfunctional family, we always tend to look at it through the lens or the eyes of Jacob. Tonight, or today I should say, I want to look at this from a different angle. My lesson today is through the eyes of Esau. I think Esau can give us some perspective on forgiveness. Because I think Esau is coming at this from a very different place, isn't he? Being the one that had that most unfortunate situation happen, where he lost his birthright, and then on top of that he lost his blessing. And he's often portrayed in a very unflattering way. Esau is kind of portrayed as this stupid hairy oaf who sells his birthright for a pot of soup and then gets swung a second time, to use the vernacular, with a blessing. But I actually think there's a lot to admire in Esau. There's a lot to say about how he forgives his brother. I want to focus on that today. I want to go back to the origins of this story. And you can find, I'm going to go flying through the scriptures. We're going to go to Genesis chapter 25. The origins and the roots of this dysfunction. And tell a story about how repentance and forgiveness comes about by Genesis chapter 33. But we want to start in Genesis chapter 25. And there we read that even while in the womb, if you would believe this, even while they were in the womb, Rebekah's womb, they're jostling with each other. They're literally fighting before they even get out. There's contention. Isn't that something? 2 nations are in your womb, the Lord said to Rebekah, and 2 people from within you will be separated, and 1 people will be stronger than the other. And Israel, as you know, as Jacob was called, will birth 12. They would be the sons of Jacob, and they will represent the 12 tribes of Israel, a nation. But Esau is going to lead another group of people called the Edomites. And it is true then that this prophecy will come to birth. But from the inception, even before birth, Jacob and Esau are seen here fighting each other. And as we go in the story in chapter 25, we read further of some of the contentious issues that develop between these 2 brothers. Esau is described as being red. I don't know if he's like Long Island red, but he's described as red, and his whole body is described like a hairy garment. He's born first, verse 24 through 26 of Genesis chapter 25. And he's also described in verse 27 as a skilled hunter, a man of the open country. But what I find most disturbing in this early period is that how they are favored by different parents. It's described in verse 28 that Jacob was favored by Rebekah, the mother, and Esau was favored by the father, Isaac. And so that sets out sort of the story that is going to be woven now. We hear that Esau comes home and he's famished from being out hunting. And he smelt that wonderful savory smell of a good home-cooked meal. Are you with me? Hope I'm not making anyone hungry. It's described as a red stew, likely, from the game that would have marinated inside and cooked at a slow heat. Sister Stacy, I'm not making you hungry, eh? And Jacob pounces on the opportunity, as a cunning man, I might add, to sell or gain the birthright by selling this pot of soup to his brother. Esau says in verse 32, I'm about to die. And Jacob is Johnny on the spot, isn't he? He's willing to make a deal. And what's interesting is he's clearly a smart and cunning fellow, because he ensures that the deal is set with an oath to make sure that there's no way that this could go back, that this is permanent. And Esau does it. But we also read in verse 34 that he despised his birthright. So almost immediately, he had what some of us would call buyer's remorse, right? He had the soup, he got filled, he was no longer hungry, and now he despises his birthright. He wished he had never done that. And as we move along in Genesis 27, things start to heat up even some more. We read in verse 27 of Genesis 27 that Isaac is now getting old. He is weak, and his eyes are not working like they used to. He's basically blind. And he calls his oldest son, who he loves and favors more than his younger, to come and receive his blessings. He gives him instructions. He says, go out into the open country to hunt some wild game for me, and prepare that kind of tasty food that I like so much. Bring it to me, and I will give you my blessing before I die. That's what he says. And so Esau excitedly goes out hunting, listening to his father, being obedient to his father, also excited about getting his blessing, I'm sure. But guess who's been listening on the side of the tent while all these instructions are being given? Isaac's wife, Esau's mother, Rebekah. And she quickly goes to Jacob and tells him all that has happened. And in verse 6 to 10, she gives him instructions as to how he could swing the father. She tells him, go out, bring in the game, I'll prepare the food, and then you take it to your father and you get the blessing that your brother should get. There's something dangerous when parents favor one child over another, isn't there? And it's even really worse when a parent favors a child so much over another that they would do wicked things for that child. They'll lie for a child. They'll manipulate for a child. There's a lesson in this for us. I love my child, and I'm sure every parent loves their child, but we should never get to the point where we cross lines of ethics. And we do things that are against the law, or at least unethical, just because we bias towards our child. But Rebekah clearly crossed many lines, because not only did she hatch this plot, but she got her son to go out and sin by deceiving the father. In fact, she says in verse 13, after Jacob points out to his mother that basically you're getting me to lie and pretend to be my brother, and this might be a problem, and I might get cursed. She turns around in verse 13 and says, my son, let the curse fall on me. Just do what I say and go and get them for me. Could you imagine? So Jacob went and did all that his mother said. And he comes back with the game, and the food is prepared. And then Rebekah takes some of Esau's clothes, his best clothes, so that the smell of Esau would be on those clothes, those garments. She dresses him, and then she takes the goat skin and puts it around his neck and his arms so that Esau would be deceived into thinking that it was Esau, because remember, he was hairy like a garment. And then she told him to go and present it to her father, to his father. And so the deception begins. In verse 22 to 26, we read about how Jacob enters the tent of his father. And Isaac, who's clearly blind and is relying on his touch, feels around. And there's something odd, because he thinks he hears the voice of Jacob, but when he touches the man that he thinks is Esau, it feels and it touches like Esau. He feels the hair. And so he's a little confused. And he says, "Are you really my son Esau?" And the voice replies, "I am," he replied. That's a lie. That's a lie. Jacob has just lied. But he goes along with it. And because he believes his son not to lie, Jacob goes along with it, and Esau blesses him. Isaac blesses Jacob. And scarcely after Jacob has received the blessing through his lie, Esau comes in, excited, having prepared, having gone out and hunted, and brought the game in. He comes back to present his gift to his father. And when Esau realizes what has happened, and when Isaac realizes what has happened, he trembles violently. And he's extremely upset as a father, because he realized that he has been deceived by his younger son. And if you think Isaac was upset because he trembled violently, I want you to appreciate how Esau felt, because Esau, it says, burst out with a loud and bitter cry. And he said to his father, bless me, in desperation. Just, don't you have something left for me? You have 2 sons. I'll take something. But remember now, Isaac had reserved a blessing for one, and he had given so much in his blessing, land and food and grain and riches. There wasn't anything left for Esau. And Esau said to his father, do you have only one blessing, my father? Bless me too. And the text tells us in verse 38 that Esau wept aloud. You know, when you weep, that's not just a tear dropping down your face. That's not little, When you weep aloud, that's like you bawling. This was a serious thing. The whole hope that he might have had for life, his whole future now was ruined. It bothered him greatly. And even the poetic blessing that we get really tells you exactly how bad things were. Your dwelling will be away from the earth's riches and the dew of heaven above. You will live by the sword, and you will serve your brother. I mean, everything that Esau heard that day must have just eaten him apart. Hurt him so much. And so we read in verse 41 that Esau held a grudge against Jacob because of the blessing his father had given him. And he said to himself, the days of mourning for my father are near, then I will kill my brother Jacob. So what that meant, Brother Hasty, was that as soon as the father died, Esau was going to seek revenge and kill his brother Jacob. What I find most troubling about this is what Rebekah now tells Jacob to do. a mother, knowing that one of her sons wants to kill the other, wouldn't you think that she would go to Jacob in haste and say, listen, you need to make it right with your brother. You have wronged him. I have wronged him because I was the one that hatched this whole idea. Let us make peace with our brother. Let us go to him and beg for forgiveness. Rebekah instead instructs Jacob to leave the country. Not to seek forgiveness. Not to apologize. Not to make amends for what he did that was wrong. But instead to leave. To flee. To turn your back on your family and go to another country. And so Jacob does what his mother tells him to do. And Jacob leaves and goes and lives with Laban for 20 years. For 20 years he labors. And in those 20 years there's no letter to Esau asking for forgiveness. There's no communication as far as we know. There's no effort to reach out and to travel back to his homeland. But in Genesis 32, when he's trying to escape now Laban, Jacob finally sends a message ahead to his brother Esau. And it's interesting because in the message that he sends with the messengers, he says basically three things. Number one, he refers to himself now as a servant. Your servant Jacob says. And remember, he had the birthright and the blessing. So to call himself a servant says something, doesn't it? He then also refers, secondly, to Esau as Lord now. Your servant says to your Lord Esau. And in a final expression of humility, he asked, may my Lord find favor. May I find favor in your eyes, my Lord. Does this sound good? It does. I agree with you. But when I read this a second time and a third time, you know what struck me as importantly missing? An apology. In everything he says to his spies, there's not an apology. He never says, and tell my brother, my Lord, I'm sorry. He never says that. But he's scared. He's extremely afraid because the messengers tell him that Esau has 400 men and they're coming to meet you. And the text tells us in verse 7 that he had great fear and distress. So what does he do? He has great fear and distress because all he knows is 400 men are coming with Esau. He prays. And what he does in his prayer is he asks God to save him from Esau. Verse 11. He doesn't just pray though, he plans. Because he's a practical man. And he knows that 400 men is a lot of men. And so he's going to divide his family into two. And he's even going to divide his flocks, his sheep, his goats, his ewes, all of his animals, his camels, and even his servants. And then he's going to tell his servants as they move forward that each of them should take a gift with them. Female goats, male goats, ewes and rams and donkeys. And between each herder there will be space. And they're going to, in each instance, they're going to send a gift and let Esau know that this is coming from your brother, your servant. And he's doing this intentionally because he thinks that Esau will be placated, will be mollified, will feel sorry or some sense of remorse by receiving all these gifts. So he's sending messages with these gifts to pacify his brothers. Verse 20 says, "For he thought, I will pacify him with these gifts I am sending on ahead, and later, perhaps he will receive me." But he never sends with these gifts an apology. He never writes a note, "My brother," power gone, "My brother, I'm sorry." He never does that. When we read about the encounter in Genesis chapter 33, it is amazing, the forgiveness of Esau. It is truly overlooked in our scripture study. Esau, when he sees Jacob, and by the way, Jacob, when he sends his family forward, he sends his servants first. He sends Leah and her children second. And he puts in the very back Rachel and Joseph. He doesn't put himself in the front. And he protects the ones he loves the most by putting them in the back. Do you see that? But let's get ahead. Let's move on, because when we get to chapter 33, Esau is looking. He's looking for his long-lost brother he hasn't seen in 20 years. And when he sees Jacob, he runs to him. He doesn't just run to him.